State of Play time, and we have lots to talk about, so let's bring in Stephanie Hansen, former Newcastle County president and with the law firm of Young, Conaway, Stargett and Taylor. And Michael Stafford is back. He wears many hats. He's an attorney, columnist, and contributor to MSNBC. The Syrian refugee issue has become a political issue, both nationally and in Delaware. Let's break it down a bit. Governor Jack Markell is in favor of accepting refugees in Delaware. He went on MSNBC a few nights ago from our WHYY studios to say as much.
All governors, the thing that we care the most about is keeping our people safe. I mean, that is a given. And so the refugees who come here from overseas go through the most secure, the most stringent review process that anybody who comes to this country goes through. And they have to go through it before they're allowed to cross the Atlantic. I do, by the way, find it interesting that we're talking about Syrian refugees when in the case of Paris, my understanding is that virtually all of the perpetrators were either French or Belgian citizens.
So we have Republicans saying that we aren't going to be safe if the Syrian refugees come here. State Senator Gerald Hocker said he pins a letter in protest of the refugees. What's going on here?
Well, I mean, as somebody, I started writing about public policy in the context of immigration reform. It's always been an issue near and dear to my heart. I've been a very severe critic of Governor Markell when he deserves it. Certainly am not a political ally of his in any way. God bless Governor Markell for taking a stand on behalf of and in defense of some of the most vulnerable people we have in our world today. And to Gerald Hocker, to Colin Benini, to the Republican governors who are trying to make political playthings out of dispossessed people, desperate people, think long and hard about what you're doing. I mean, there is something particularly vile about fear-mongering. Fear-mongering when you're directing people against really vulnerable individuals like the Syrian refugees after an attack like what happened in Paris. I mean, to me, yes, public safety is a huge concern. We have had how many terrorist attacks in the United States committed by Syrian refugees? We've barely admitted any. Unlike many other nations in the world, we have a very lengthy vetting process that the UN has actually criticized us for. And the idea that even in the face of all that, the mere notion that one perpetrator of violence might somehow slip through the cracks, it doesn't justify the kinds of fears and the kinds of venom that are being directed against these people. And I would say to Gerald Hocker, I would say to all these Republican elected officials that our nation bears a certain moral duty to help these people, given what our policy has done in the Middle East. This is not a crisis that has evolved without our involvement. And I'm not just talking about President Obama's response to ISIS and to the Syrian revolution and to the protests there. We lit the fire in Iraq and it burned their neighbor's house down. And now these people are out there, being distributed to the four winds. We've played a role in creating this problem. We have to be part of the role, or we have to be part of the solution, and we have to render effective aid to these people in need.
Do you think this is a bigger issue downstate opposed to here in Newcastle County?
I think it is, and I think that's primarily because there are more Republican representatives in Kent and Sussex County than there are in Newcastle County, and so you're seeing this kind of fall very much along party lines, and yes, that's why you're hearing more of this come from downstate.
What about this being a Delaware campaign issue? Could this be?
Republican politicians have tried to use immigration in various guises as a wedge issue for years. Before we were demonizing, or they were demonizing Syrian refugees, they were demonizing Mexican immigrants. How effective has that been in Delaware over the long haul? I don't think very. Nationally, could it play a role? Yeah, it could. Unfortunately, it could.
And what are they talking about exactly? I mean, not accepting, what does that mean? Does that mean that we're going to, they're not going to be allowed to get driver's licenses? Does it mean they're not going to get state services? Does it mean we're saying that we need to put up barricades at 95 and all the little rural roads that go into Maryland and Pennsylvania? What does it mean?
Stephanie, your point is exact. I mean, immigration law is a federal issue. That's why it's pure grandstanding, because at a state policy level, there's very little that a state general assembly or a state governor can do about this stuff. It's federal policy, it's federal law.
What about John Carney? Should he weigh in? Is this a selling point for him since he's on the campaign trail?
If I was advising John, I would say everything I just said. It's a moral issue. Leaders have to lead. But from a purely pragmatic standpoint, well, what does John win by weighing in on this? I mean, he's going to be a governor with a limited, the governor has a number of issues on his or her plate. Immigration policy isn't one of them. I think it's more of an issue for our federal delegation, frankly.
Well, Chris Coons has become a national voice on this subject through the Foreign Relations Committee, just like Joe Biden. What do you think about some of the things he's said?
Well, I think he's correct. You know, I really like his position. I think that Chris is a very thoughtful person that comes from, he's very morally centered. And so I have a lot of faith and confidence in what he has to say.
At the end of the day, the outpouring of xenophobia, and there's no other way to describe it. Like when Markell posted some of his statements about the Syrian refugees on his official Facebook page, anybody can log on and read the comment thread, and it's ugly. It is a lot of fear mixed with xenophobia, mixed with outright racism and ignorance, directed at Arabs, at Muslims, at Syrians in general. When we out of fear, when we sink into that kind of a position, the terrorists win. If you want to combat the terrorists, if you really want to do right by the victims in Paris, the best weapon we have is love and understanding. Build bridges, build relationships. When we wall people off, when we make it an us versus them sort of confrontation with the entire Muslim world, when we refuse to be a responsible actor and leader in the world community in dealing with a real crisis, ISIS wins. The people who are speaking out in the really xenophobic ways against the Syrian refugees are aiding and abetting that enemy, even if they don't realize it.
Okay. Well, we definitely covered it all. You guys said a mouthful. For those of you at home, you can watch this whole conversation online at newsworks.org/Delaware. Michael Stafford, Stephanie Hansen, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.